great pleasure to open this, I think, last plenary session on the very important topic of investment and funding for sustainability. My name is Hendrik Müller. I'm a professor of business ethics at the University of Applied Science in Hamburg. And I have a couple of colleagues here whom I'm going to introduce, or I better let them introduce themselves. So it's a great pleasure to have Theodor Cojoianu from Edinburgh on board. So probably you can say a few words about yourself, Theodor.
Okay, so my name is Eric Nowak. I'm the Director of Finance Institute at the University of Svizzera Italiana in Lugano, and I also run a climate finance and sustainability center. So that's my link to sustainability. I have done ESG finance for 20 years, and now I'm going back to the E in the ESG and back to my roots when 30 years ago as a student in St. Gallen, I was already a member of the Environmental Economic Student Initiative, which in 1992 was also participating in the first COP in Rio de Janeiro. Not me personally, but we as an organization. So.
Okay, thanks. Great to have you. Okay, Theodor, now you're there. Probably you can introduce yourself with a few words.
Sure. Thank you, Henrik. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the invitation to be on the panel. So yeah, I am Theodor Cojoianu. I'm an associate professor in sustainable finance at the University of Edinburgh. And I had the privilege to serve on the EU platform on sustainable finance, which is the advisory body to the EU Commission working on the taxonomy legislation in particular. And in the UK also working on the Green Technical Advisory Group of the UK Treasury, also looking to set up a similar legislation. So yeah, I look forward to discussing the implications of the sustainable finance legislation.
Thank you. Thank you, Theodor. We're still waiting for a female colleague, so don't be afraid that this is a men-only panel.
No.
But before Isabel joins us, I give Theo Grassl the opportunity to introduce herself.
Hello. Thank you so much, Henrik, and a very, very warm welcome also from my side. So I'm Theo. I'm also Theodor, by the way. So we said, okay, that there is no confusion. I'm Theo. I'm a member of the executive board of the Fashion Council in Germany, and professor and lecturer for management, especially fashion and brand management, of course, and behavioral analysis. So also the psychological aspects which are pretty important in this crazy volatile world. And I'm teaching at the AMD in Munich. I'm teaching at the Polymoda and the Istituto Europeo di Design in Florence. And thank you so much for having invited me for this wonderful webinar.
Okay, thank you, Theo. And finally, she's there, Isabel. We're very happy to have you here. And we've just started to introduce ourselves. Probably you can say a few words about yourself.
Yes, I'm really excited about this panel. So I jumped into it at the last minute. But anyway, I'm really excited to be here with you in terms of expertise. I have worked in companies for a couple of years, and then I joined university about 20 years ago. So I'm a professor of innovation here at the University Lusíada and also the dean of the School of Economics and Business Studies. And the three pillars in terms of my leadership at the school is sustainability, digital, and entrepreneurship. So I'm pretty much interested in terms of learning from you, and and this discussion, I'm certain that will be really wonderful, and I welcome every one of you, and thank you so much for joining us at this Global Fashion Conference with AMD.
Thank you, Isabel. Yes, I think the conference is very well organized. That is something I can say already, and we are happy to be here. Well, the topic of sustainability is, of course, something that is an actual topic for every industry, but especially for the fashion industry. But the general question is, at what point does sustainability start, or when should we start financing sustainability? And Theo has just produced a few thoughts on that idea, probably that we should start much earlier to finance sustainability. So Theo, probably can start with your short presentation, and we take this as a starting point for further discussions.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Hendrik. So it's actually not a presentation. It's just bringing my thoughts and my input onto some PowerPoint slides. And as you may know, we do have these two aspects, which is sustainability in finance or investment. But the question is, who has to pay the bill later on? And in preparation for this webinar, I was making myself some thoughts, and one of the most important questions we have to answer is, if we would understood money, would we still choose fashion? In terms of the profit, in terms of the reliability, in terms of the turnover, in terms of whatever, in terms of image, in terms of creativity, craftsmanship, whatever. And the question really to say, would we do this? Because maybe there are different businesses who are much more or focused with much more retention than fashion. And this question is also asked by investors who definitely do understand money. And the question is, why should they choose fashion? And the same we have also for the fashion companies and the fashion industries. If you are a young creative guy finishing your education and starting maybe your fashion business by doing a startup, a little label or whatever, would you also still choose fashion, or maybe shift into a more efficient and more wealthy whatever business? And this came then up with some aspects which are definitely a fact, and we should start always by having the end in mind. And there are so much talented young people out there. We call the hidden champions. They have a cutting-edge education in fashion design, in management, in visual merchandising, you name it. But, and this is my opinion, and this is my experience, that the most graduates really feel at a loss when it comes up to all the financial topics. And sorry for that, I switched on not to disturb. So when it comes up to the financial topics, because this is not usual, one of the core aspects when it comes to education in fashion business. So, and typical questions: what does it cost to source the materials? How much is it really to design a prototype and organize the whole production, which is also everything related to the supply chain? What does it cost to ship internationally or to rent a show space? And how much investment do I, as a young guy in fashion business, need to realize my ideas? And the most important question always is, where and how can I find a customer or consumer who will pay that price? And for me, I think we have to think a little bit different. We have to think out of the box. And this is then later on when we are talking about aspects. What if? So what if the investment in fashion starts pretty much earlier, especially regarding the economical and the financial education for the designers and the managers. And of course, the fashion managers do have a more economical education and topics like accounting, balancing, and so on and so on. But usually the designers do not have that. And this is what we are already working also at the AMD, that we think and we are convinced that also the designers do need a a glimpse idea of calculations, of branding, of marketing, of all the financial aspects of please be aware of the fact that you have to pay taxes. Yeah? So this is the whole, not that sexy, not that creative part what we have in fashion. And the next question or the next aspect, what if we then would be, or can we be more efficient in the financial aspects of the sustainability by thinking out of the box, which means that we start much earlier with investing, not at the end of the supply chain, say, okay, but at the very beginning. And what if we would really be able that we change the change? And I think that we definitely do have to change the change when we take a look at the volatile and the crazy world out there we are confronted with. And for me, is that sustainability starts really already before you do the first sketch on a piece of paper, because sustainability is much more a mindset than something to set up on and something to work with. Yeah? Sustainability should not be something like a necessity, and I would be happy if we are sooner or later in a situation where we do not have to talk about sustainability anymore, because sustainability is something normal from the very, very beginning. And the question is, and this may be, or this could be maybe a part of the discussion, are there investors, are there possibilities, instruments, whatever, for funding, that we start this investment much more earlier in education, by maybe giving prizes to the best concepts, whatever. So, and this were my little thoughts about the sustainability and finance aspect.
Thank you.
Kill your business.
No, thank you very much. And probably we should take your last chart as a starting one. I mean, we have two people here who are much more into financial aspects and regulations than I am, and probably others are, Eric and Theodor. So you can say something to the vision that Theo just told us. Is it realistic that investing into industry starts much earlier in during the education of later entrepreneurs? Or are there too many regulations already there so that investors have to, they can't think out of the box, but they have to follow certain paths of investments. So Theodor, what's your idea on that?
Well, as there's a lot of academics on on the call, and academics ourselves, of course, starting with education is is where I gravitate, but also being biased as an academic. But there's maybe I can present what's happening at the European level on the sustainable finance legislation side, and really how it trickles down to the level of entrepreneurs. So in a nutshell, the European Commission has this data dictionary, which is called the EU taxonomy. In itself, it doesn't do much. It just takes economic activity by economic activity, including, for example, finishing of textiles, wearing apparel, footwear, tanning of leather. There's quite a few very detailed economic activities that the Commission is currently considering. And it's then trying to say which of these economic activities contribute to one of the 6 environmental objectives of the European Commission. So these are climate change mitigation, adaptation, circular economy, pollution prevention and control, water, and biodiversity and ecosystems. They may be called slightly different and longer, just kind of my my summary of them. And they're linked together, so you can do, for example, a substantial contribution to climate. So, for example, you can have a manufacturing process which is really eco-efficient, and then the Commission could recognize you for that, but then equally you could do no significant harm to the other environmental objectives. So it could be around the amount of water that you use, for example. It's a very detailed kind of data dictionary. I won't get into the data dictionary itself. I'll stop there. But what this data dictionary does is it then links to what investors are looking for. And this is the important part. It requires financial instruments that are considered sustainable in Europe to say how they're sustainable. And one way in which they can prove their sustainability is by investing, particularly at the entrepreneurship level. We're talking about sustainable venture capital funds that have to show how they're aligned to this taxonomy. And from that perspective, you already have some formal legislation that presses the investors in the European Union who want to claim to be green to use data and to basically engage very deeply at the level of angel, Series A angel maybe less because it's usually people, but financial instruments starts at like Series A, for example, funding up the way to the IPO. You already see that pressure. I know myself a few funds that are already talking to entrepreneurs and say, if you can't build your data collection system, we won't be able to invest because we can't then prove to our pension funds that we're sustainable. So we already see this education, implementation, and investment in data and infrastructure to prove that you're actually green that is going on.
Okay, thanks. So you just talked about the European side of things. Eric, probably you can add a few of the global perspectives we have in this respect of financing.
Yeah, I think in general we should go one step back, right? So, and when we talk about sustainability, the first thing we should ask is what do we mean by sustainability, right? So, like, Theodor has outlined to a large extent what the European Commission thinks about sustainability, right? So it's very concrete regulatory action, which may or may not be useful to the means, right? So, but other people have different, let's say, ideas about what sustainability really should be, right? So, and if you go to developing countries and if you think of the Sustainable Development Goals, there are more than 6, obviously. Yes. And so for, let's say, somebody in a developing country, it's much more important, to feed the children, so to speak, right? So like, and of course, access to water is also important, but maybe climate change is maybe not top of their priority list because it's more mid to long-term perspective on them. So, so the EU regulation is quite complex, right? So, and very outlined, as was very nicely described. So you may or may not be critical of it, but as a company or entrepreneur working here in the ecosystem, you have to deal with it, right? So like you have to be compliant with it. And as Theodor says, also true for if you are an like an investment fund or investor wanting to invest in investment fund. There's also the SFDR, which you haven't outlined, but so it's all pretty much regulation. Some people say there's a lot of disclosure going on, right? So, but there's not really much substance or content behind the disclosure, which really should meet the objectives. So I think, therefore, the first thing is to realize what is the priority of or an investor or of an entrepreneur or a customer, right? So like who buys fashion. So I mean, for me personally, priority is climate change because this is the most urgent problem that we're facing. And so then we have to think about, okay, what can we do to tackle climate change, right? So how can we reduce greenhouse gas emission? How can we avoid carbon emissions? How we can capture this? And so in my research at the center, so we've been like looking at, okay, what are the main drivers of climate change? And there's, of course, the production and the emissions of companies, also of fashion companies, right? So, and the European Union and other countries are tackling this through emissions trading systems, right? So giving allowances to companies to emit greenhouse gas emissions only up to a certain extent. But let's say the big, question mark or the open question is what is called the scope 3 emissions, right? The scope 1 are the direct emissions, which are under the control of companies. Scope 2 are the indirect emissions under the control of companies, like the the electricity that they receive, but Scope 3 is everything upstream and downstream in the supply chain, which they don't have a direct control on. But if we look at, let's say, the big problems and drivers of climate change in the world, so the biggest single driver of climate change, according to IPCC, is deforestation for agricultural reasons, right? So like what we all know when we see pictures of the rainforest in the Amazon being burned down, for cattle ranching, for soybean production, and timber logging and mining. So, and this is the problem which the EU regulation is not tackling, because the European emissions trading system, you cannot basically compensate your own direct emissions through investing into, let's say, avoided deforestation RED projects, for example. So it only happens under what is called a voluntary carbon market, which is a very small market, which last year had just a turnover of 1 billion euros. So it's a pretty small market, if you think about it, right? So the EU ETS is like almost several hundred times as big, right? So like say so because it's also regulated, the price is also much higher. So so I think if, let's say, we want to tackle climate change, and this is our primary objective for sustainability, which can mean a lot more things, right? So like in finance, the term is E, S, and G, right? So E is environmental, S is social, and G is governance, right? So, and for, let's say, up until 5 years ago, most of the ESG was governance and was not about social or environmental concerns. And now, 5 years and counting, we start more and more caring about the environmental aspects. But of course, there are other aspects of sustainability that may be more important for others, right? So like gender equality, for example, right? So good governance, and but if we want to tackle climate change as the primary, let's say, threat to mankind, then we need to think, okay, how can we do this, and how can, in this context, fashion entrepreneurs and potential fashion entrepreneurs, contribute to this solution to the problem, and not be more of the problem. So, and
I'm always playing kind of the advocatus diaboli in this round, and you are completely right, Eric and Theodor. But the question is, okay, there are, from the EU, from the United Nations, you have the SDGs and so on and so on. You have regularities, you have the climate change we are all aware of. So, and now you have maybe certain restrictions and so on and so on and so on. But I think there are two very important aspects we have to think about. So, if you are a big company, if you are Kering, if you are Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, you have completely different sources and resources to deal with these requirements. But what should you do if you are a little company, a little designer label, and you are overwhelmed with these regularities and so on and so on and so on? This is the first thing. And the second thing is, so we have to differentiate if we are talking about the big players in fashion industry, or about the little, small and medium enterprises, which is definitely the majority of the companies. And the second thing is, what we also have to have in mind, how the governments and the local authorities are involved in this whole game. And just take one example. If you go to Italy and if you go to France, we have a completely different perception of fashion, because it's in their DNA. There is much more support from the government and from local authorities in fashion than, for instance, in Germany. We do know this at the Fashion Council, because we are really heavily in contact with the European Union, with Maria Gabriel from the Commission, even with Ursula von der Leyen, and we are trying to get some support. And we are always behind France and Italy, because the fashion industry there has a completely different priority than in other countries. And this is what we have to differentiate. Talking about the regularities, talking about the climate change, whatever, no doubt about that, what we have to do in terms of the sustainability. but do the one thing, but not forget aspects which we cannot change.
But can I just jump in here? Because I think, I do believe, I mean, first you are completely right? So the situation is a lot different for a big publicly listed company or a strong group and a small entrepreneur or medium-sized firm. But I think in particular, the challenges that we have with climate crisis and sustainability in general is also a huge business opportunity for, let's say, small entrepreneurs who have clever ideas to get into the market. I mean, just to give you an example, so last year I was at the Building Bridges week in Geneva, which also tries to kind of combine, let's say, finance and sustainability. And there was an entrepreneur from Scandinavia, don't want to mention any names here, but she's designing sports apparel, sports fashion without plastics, right? So so that's a very particular angle of, let's say, sustainability, which is not only relating to climate change, but also, let's say, to personal health, right? So because the plastics is not healthy. And so she has found a very successful niche, right? So in this aspect. So she basically developed a new market for this type of fashion. And I do believe that especially for young people who even care more about, let's say, climate change and other aspects of sustainability than we old white males, so to speak, right? So, but because they are the next generation, they do even care more, and they can come up with even more innovative ideas to tackle this and get also funding for this enterprises, right? So I do believe there is also a huge chance for this huge new.
And this would be then interesting, because if investors are jumping in at this stage to say, okay, we are supporting you by creating new ideas, because the question is always who is coming up with new innovative ideas in terms of creating new material, mushroom leather, whatever. Is it the industry, or is it the designer around the corner? Who is sitting in his little office, but he does usually not have maybe the financial resources to, or even the technical resources. And if investors would really jump in at this very early stage, this is what I meant with, we do have to think sustainability already a bit earlier to say, okay, you do not have the resources in terms of the expertise and in terms of the financial aspects, but we invest in you.
Mm-hmm.
May I jump into that?
Yes, please, Isabel.
Yes, because from my point of view, what I think is that the financial system is still lagging a little bit behind. What's happening is that in terms of the finance system, you have the traditional funding through banks and stock exchange, and through self-funding. So through the cash flow of the companies. And at this stage, we don't really have, we are just starting now to have some signs in terms of the banking system, so that some indicators, some KPIs regarding sustainability are really looked at, people who are financial analysts, and see whether this is a sustainable project, and that this kind of investment is going to pay off. The same goes to the stock exchange market. So there is this big gathering under the umbrella of the United Nations, between the directors of the stock exchanges from the main markets in the world, like New York, London, Frankfurt, etc., and Switzerland and Zurich. But the thing is, they go every year, twice a year, to New York. They discuss, they have workshops, they are trying to move forward. But at this stage, what we have is a kind of complicated system of a lot of consultancy firms that sell their products in terms of certification for being sustainable, which is not I wouldn't say completely transparent, but at least it's a bit subjective. There are different systems from different consultancy firms. And then you have the funding sources that were meant to be for innovation. As you know, are fully aware, this was one of the main problems that we had in European Union, is to have funding for innovation. And from the Lisbon strategy, a sort of, and even before that, in terms of the green paper on innovation, we had a couple of orientations regarding, for instance, the more transparency in terms of creating association for business angels, more space for venture capital, where most of the societies for venture capital have investment from governments or at least regions within the European Union. And what happened at this stage is that we are really lagging behind. What you, Theo, was saying is absolutely true in terms of industry have a deadline, a very strict deadline at this stage in terms of becoming circular. I think that from my point of view, from what I know from the company, in terms of energy efficiency or in terms of water consumption, they have been doing a lot for almost a decade. So that's not the problem. The problem is the product, and the problem is the distribution, and the problem is the consumption. And what drives me crazy, to be honest, is that I know that, and we all know that there is a lot of money in the world. So you take, like, for instance, the Carbon Disclosure Project, which is a counseling organization who, for a set of funding firms or investment funds, that he has $114 trillion. So people here in Europe, they are waiting for public funding. And that's okay, because what we are talking about is we need funding for investment, and funding for investment has to come from a different source, different from a bank, a lending situation or whatever, because it's on the long term. But and this particular organization, we can say it's private funding, and it's available for all the people. So what they do is they give advice to people on the companies that people, the investors should invest into according to sustainability. So they do their homework. So the thing is that in terms of what I came across in terms of the last conference that was made in Eurotex in the beginning of October here in Porto, is that these kind of issues in terms of not sustainable stock exchange or banking, which is, as I said, a bit more slow in terms of getting regulations and KPIs, etc. But in terms of venture capital and business angel, there is nothing at this stage, absolutely nothing. So that when an investor, may be a small company, a medium-sized company, and we all look at these conglomerates of big companies, but we know that these big companies have a lot of small and medium companies that they hire for many different purposes. And these small and medium companies do not have any information whatsoever of where to get the money. Where is the money?
Yeah.
And they are not privileged. So if they go to a bank, they are not privileged because they are pursuing sustainability towards an IT project or towards another project that says, you know, I have this ROI, I have this return on investment. You know, there is no way they can compete with that. So.
Okay. You brought the point of the inequality of companies within the fashion industry, so that the large companies or the conglomerates get all the money or get all the funding, and the small and medium-sized companies disadvantages there. But another point that I want to bring up is that the ESG criteria you mentioned, Eric. The problem is that I think even there we have a realm of uncertainty what this really means, and especially if you look at companies who are on the production side, they of course they offer now sustainable clothes, but are they really sustainable? That's the general question. And then again, how can an investor decide if a company is sustainable in the fashion industry or not? So they probably believe that the marketing slogans of these companies are not, and cannot prove if they are really sustainable or not. Can you say something on that, Theodor?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of great points that have been made, and maybe I can start with one and say there's a lot of things that fashion in a way is very unique, right? Its value chain is quite unique, but then there's also some parts where it could be judged like any other industry. And to both Eric and Isabel's points, you could think particularly at the manufacturing side, for example, right? Even the taxonomy and so on, we have some criteria for manufacturing, but actually, if you look at what's needed is the capex towards renewable energy. So for a lot of manufacturing, decarbonizing your grid and energy investment will, get a lot of the industry there. And that's not just manufacturing of textiles, for example. It would be from steel to aluminium to everything that just broad-based manufacturing sector. So there is a part, I think, of the economy of the fashion value chain that could be viewed just simply as a business model, quite agnostic, and say, you guys need to decarbonize. Here are the financial instruments. Here are the bank loans. Here are the green bonds. Here are even the loans at the level of SMEs. And by the way, the Mittelstand in Germany is very different from SME in Eastern Europe, where I come from, and so on. So we have a further challenge across Europe that SMEs might have different sizes, and so that's also something. So that's one part. There's what I really liked what also Eric said about that theory of change. So for example, around procurement, do you procure, for example, materials from protected areas, or how do you deal with biodiversity? And that requires a thinking which may not be, so for example, in the EU legislation that is not being recognized, we don't necessarily we have some data systems, they're getting better, but you need to have a very holistic kind of theory of change and look at all of these angles, and that's not always, from a resourcing perspective, you can't always do it all. And to the point that, yes, you will have some big companies where you can put a lot of pressure that you make sure that they deal with the sourcing, with the carbon emissions, that could work. But yeah, at the level of the entire SME sector, we might need to have what is currently happening with the carbon border adjustment mechanism on the carbon side, right? So if Europe is becoming more carbon efficient, you don't want to import from very energy and carbon intensive value chain outside of Europe. So maybe there is something to say that, well, actually Europe doesn't want to source from protected areas that are properly unmanaged, and we won't source from the Amazon and so on. But these are also political decisions. As much as some entrepreneurs would like to to push the story, it might be hard if you don't also have some legislation to then match it so that the financial institutions recognize this as a something that they could claim themselves. And maybe just as a last point, what I find as being not necessarily fashionable myself on a personal, but what I find interesting in the fashion sector, pretty much like in the food sector, we're dealing a lot with you have business to consumer business models, and then you have the B2B ones, right? And I think for the business to consumer models, you may be able to, or there have been sustainable narratives sold which aren't necessarily scientifically sustainable, and right, and so but then you also have these more scientific ones where you may not be able to use them as a marketing or straight away explain it to the public as easily. Because they might, not care, to be honest. So there is a question of, how do you intervene across B2B, B2C, understand these incentives, and also the marketing around it, because a lot of the push from companies is not only to raise cheaper capital, but also to use that for product selling. So I think there's a lot. Maybe I can bring it all together. I think there's a lot that we can do just by considering fashion as any other sector. But there is also, I think, a lot that can be done in considering this sourcing part, which at the moment is not recognized or is not formalized too well in criteria in the financial sector's thinking. And to Isabel's point on entrepreneurs, we're having a bit of a challenge in Europe in that we have a very developed banking sector, but you can't have banks. A lot of entrepreneurs can't take loans too early. So that R&D funding that Isabel was talking is really important. The EU taxonomy does have an R&D funding criteria, and it's very loose to allow for this R&D piloting, but the spread of venture capital like instruments across Europe is just really small. So yeah, that's I think a key challenge. The equity side of it is just not happening at the scale we need it to.
And when you mentioned that, Theodor, I think that we also should invest much more in cross-business and in cross-business innovation. It's taking place, I think, a little bit, but if you take, because you mentioned food, so take the fashion and take the food industry. So the fashion industry needs the skin, needs the leather, and the food industry needs the meat. And if we find much more cross-business innovations to invest, and these are only little steps, but I think we do not have, or we should not make the mistake that we take too large, too high set goals. We have to do it step by step by step, and what I'm always struggling with, also with the students, and also with the discussions in the council with the members or in other universities, is are there really any criteria who say, okay, this is sustainability? Is it really enough that we say, okay, the supply and the value chain is covering each aspect and each criteria for sustainability, or is it just only one aspect? So where does sustainability start? With the raw material, with the fabrics, with the wages, wherever. And these are really in my opinion, the key aspects. Because we are talking about sustainability. Ask 10 people, you will get 10 different answers about the sustainability, because it's always at the own perspective. If you ask an investor, he has a completely different expectation on sustainability than the consumer. Yeah,
that's true. And some people go for the ecological side, others for the social side. Eric, you talked about that before, that questions like gender and justice and things like that are also part of, or the whole diversity discussion are also part of the sustainability aspect.
By the way, Hendrik, sorry to interrupt you. A very interesting project we are setting up is, in terms of the gender, are women more sustainable than men?
Mm-hmm. Are there any results yet?
This is really a very interesting and a very important question. Yeah. If you are addressing women, you have to sell sustainability in a completely different way than addressing men.
Mm-hmm. Sounds very interesting. Isabel, I haven't heard your answer to that.
We have not yet an answer. We're still working on that.
Well, no, your comment, Isabel, I haven't heard that, because you said something I couldn't hear.
Yeah, I think, as I said before, right, so we need to prioritize, and the goals of E, S, and G are not all of them aligned, but some of them are even conflicting, right? So like, and therefore we need to prioritize, as I said, as entrepreneurs, as consumers, as investors. Of course, in Europe, the EU Commission gives us, let's say, some guidance that we need to follow, right? So like we have a bit less of a scope to prioritize, but in reality, that's still what we do, right? So here the focus is a lot on let's say the climate, the pollution, and the greenhouse gas emission, which I think is correct, because that's the one thing that we need to prioritize, right? So, but in terms of maximizing all goals at the same time, is not possible, right? So I mean,
right.
So the most basic conflict that you can think of is the production of food for as many people as possible. So we want to maximize, let's say, agricultural proceeds, and of course this goes in direct conflict with deforestation and keeping the land, and let's say for ecosystem service to store carbon in the trees, right? So that's why the deforestation happens, and that's obviously a conflict, and that's why it's not so easy to tell these let's say people in these countries you should deforesting the forest, right? So because it's bad for the climate, because first and foremost they need to think of how to feed their children, right? So because a lot of these people in these countries where you have rainforests are very poor, like, and also in Africa, and so it's not as easy, right? So we cannot just patronize them and say, oh, you need to stop doing this. Of course we need to also have a role ourselves in being models, but we need to give some kind of compensation to them, right? So like, and that's what happens, for example, in the avoided deforestation space. That's also something where I do see a lot of innovative potential for, let's say, even fashion entrepreneurs, right? When they link their products to sustainable, let's say, materials, for example. And if you think about food processing, right? So we can, so one thing is to go vegan. So we need less space for cattle ranching, okay? And cattle ranching is one of the main reasons of deforestation. But we can also think of, let's say, the getting of food not from annual crops, but perennial crops. So basically we only eat food which grows on trees, ideally, right? So like, because then we don't have this conflict. But we could also think of only producing fashion which grows on trees, right? I'm not a fashion expert, but I do know that there are, let's say, ecologically friendly supply materials, right? So, and I do believe that using them in a smart or even cross-product way will, find a market, right? So maybe not a mass market, but there is always a niche for, let's say, fashion enthusiasts who will buy these more sustainable products, right? So, and then of course, who verifies or validates that the products are really sustainable is another question, right? So, but in terms of let's say opportunities for entrepreneurs, and I'm maybe a bit less pessimistic than Isabel on this, because I do believe in today's world, yes, if you go to a bank as a young startup entrepreneur for a fashion project, it's probably very difficult, right? So, but you, on the other hand, there's Web 3.0. You can try to do a crowdfunding on a crowdfunding platform if you have a particular very innovative product, right? So you can link it to an NFT, and you can have an NFT drop and play it on all your social media. So, I mean, I'm not a big expert on, on doing this, but the young people, right, so who are all on their Insta and Discord and Twitter channels, I mean, there are some remarkable successes, right? It's not always for, let's say, useful products or sustainable products, but I do believe that if you link these new ways of, let's say, Web 3.0 marketing, also funding opportunities with sustainable products, that this is a huge success, or could be a very successful for many startup entrepreneurs, right? So who understand both, let's say, the digital side and the sustainable side, right? So like you need to combine basically the two things, right? So you need to combine the digitalization and, let's say, the sustainability or the decarbonization. And if you do this in the right way, then I see an enormous potential for successful business models for these people that you educate here at we educate at our universities also in Ghana. So I'm a bit less optimistic than Isabel.
Yeah. So. May I just add two things from what you are saying. One is related with what Eric has just talked about in terms of the digital, because one of my concerns at this point is that we are certainly going more and more digital, but at the same time, the digital also brings with it sustainability problems.
Right.
First, you have to look at your laptops and computers that you have in your room. They are made of plastic, of polymers. They are based on oil, all of them. Then you can measure the greenhouse emissions from servers. Then you can measure the greenhouse emissions from the activity that people have every day in terms of mailing, in terms of getting connected, from, with smartphones, from search on the internet. So what we are doing in terms of digital is not neutral, is not even carbon neutral at this stage. You have trash every day in terms of digital, and you have greenhouse emissions. And this is one of the concerns also for the United Nations and for the European Union. In the plan of innovation that was released in July of this year, this problem is addressed because this is a problem. So what I think is that we have two trends that go together, digital and sustainability. But for me, it is more important sustainability. For me, it is more important the survival of life, whatever form of life is, and human species, on the top. So this is one thing. The other thing is a kind of provocative and at the same time an answer to what Theo started his intervention in terms of if we are in fashion, if we are investors and we look at fashion, would that be one of the sectors that we would really invest in? And I would say that yes, because at the same time we have evidence, even from the European Union, that what they have done in terms of getting sustainability regulated is they have started with the food and beverage sector. So this was the first plan. Why? Because this is really the primary sector, okay? But the second sector, in terms of consumption, is fashion. Whatever you think fashion is, from shoes to textiles or whatever. Why? Because in terms of what you need for every day, you need food, you need hygiene, you need clean products. Okay, this is the consumer goods, mass products, and then you have fashion. Mm-hmm. And this is why the European Commission, I think, was wise to release at the same time the plans in terms of sustainability for what is, or I should regard, the most polluting industries, because of the wide range they have, which is construction, building. So everything has to do with sustainable architecture and engineering, and at the same time fashion, because maybe fashion in terms of the margin is not that big in terms of the mass market, but in terms of the volume, it's huge. And we have here in Europe the second largest market in the world after China.
Okay.
So that's why everybody wants to come here and sell here. And so I think that these are two aspects, that I would like to add to your comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Isabel, and thanks to all of you for the wonderful discussion so far. We talked for nearly an hour now, and I think it's time to.
I think Henrik,
yes,
may I just add one more thing, which is very important for me, and I think for all of us. I'm coming back to the very beginning to see sustainability as a mindset, and this is not only for every one of us. Just think about email. I think there are around 3 billion emails sent a day, and the server farms to allow that is creating as much emissions as 260,000 flights a day from Düsseldorf to Sydney. And this is, we do need a complete change of our media consumption, food consumption, fashion consumption, and so on. And also the investors do have to make a change in their perception of sustainability, because usually they go there and say, if it doesn't sell, I don't do it. And if we get investors who are changing the mindset, they will never be altruistic, by the way.
No,
and this is quite okay. And this is quite okay. But it's like with the temperature, with the climate change. If we are able just to reduce everything a little bit, step by step, then I think we are really on the right track. So, and now it's to you, Henrik.
No, it's totally fine. You started the whole discussion, and thanks for your comment now. But we should open the discussion now, and I think there is already someone who wanted to speak. So go ahead with your question. Well, actually, there's a comment by Oliver who said, on top of this framing and priming, ask 100 students about sustainability, ESG, and guess how many will stick to E only, or even more narrow, just circle around CO2 footprint and using and/or waste disposal. So I 100% underpin your position. This was just a comment to our discussion.
So, and there are so many aspects we have to have in mind when it's coming up with sustainability, especially the psychological ones. So if you are a young teenager and you have 150 euros, so you have different options. You can go to a slow fashion store and buy 2 T-shirts with organic cotton, or you can go to Primark for 150 euros and get the equipment for half a year. and you have to take a decision. And I think that we do have to bring this sustainability topic much more earlier also into education. This has to be a topic in the schools already. To make the young people, the kids already aware of what they are doing. Not with this finger to say, oh, you do not have to do it, but in a completely different way.
Mm-hmm. I think this is a very good point, and I think that maybe Eric and Theodor could talk a little bit about what they think should be done in this regard, because I totally agree with you, Theo. There is a lot to be made.
Yeah, I mean, would have been nice to have the question from Claudia, but anyway, so I think
obviously the question has been answered. This was just said by the beginning.
Okay. Anyway, so like, but first of all, I completely do agree, right? So like, also with what Isabel said before. So of course, digitalization is not per se emission-free or sustainable, but to the contrary, it contributes a lot, to further, let's say, environmental damages and greenhouse gas emissions and so on. But so people will not stop using computers and iPhones and smartphones, right? And especially not the young generation. And I mean, even let's say the activists from Lost Generation have smartphones, right? So like when they go to the museums. So it's a habit which we're not getting rid of. So what we can do about it is basically the only thing we can do is, or which we should do is, to innovate, to having more sustainable, like less environmental damaging laptops and smartphones, right? And then people need to buy it, and we need to see whether the customer is actually acting according to his, principles, right? So, and there's obviously with each of us a big, let's say, diversion between what we think, what we should do, or what others should do, right? So, and what we do ourselves. But that's a matter of fact. So, nevertheless, even for young people, I mean, like, it's true. Like, they don't have a lot of money, but on the other hand, you can, and on the voluntary carbon market, offsetting 1 ton of carbon emissions costs like less than 10 euros, right? So, like, and of course, there's no, let's say, perfect way to offset your own carbon footprint, and it's also not the only thing that you should do, but it's something which you could do, right? So, and then you can help, let's say, projects which are conducted in other countries where the problems are even more severe, but where there's lack of funding, right? So, like, I'm always going back to the problem of deforestation, because it's mostly happening in developing countries in Africa and Latin America. And the main issue that the project developers who are basically protecting these forests are facing is lack of funding, right? So, and we have the funds, and in Europe we're only like 20% of global emissions, but we have a lot more assets under management and a lot more financial power. And I always say this when I'm in Switzerland. Switzerland has only 0.1% of global emissions, right? but a lot of assets under management. So the money needs to flow from here to there. So that's my idea, right? So in a very basic kind of way, right? So of course this is difficult for young people to do, but even they can contribute something, I would say, right? So, and there are like creative models enabling this, making this possible. Of course, you need to always look, who are you going to give money to do something, right? So what are you actually doing with the money? What is in the footnotes, right? So, but there are possibilities also for young people to, let's say, consume or invest in a more sustainable kind of way, right? So, like, you just need to really verify what you're doing and constantly question yourself and others if what is being done is really a useful thing. Just to give you an example, which I meant to bring here, is like there is a company, or was a company, still operating as a Brazilian platform, which has been started early this year to mint NFTs to fund rainforest protection. And I mean, the NFTs didn't have a lot of artistic value, in my opinion. It was all done by one artist and was more like the Spaceball type collectible kind of thing. So it was not, let's say, the fundamental art. But so that started quite successful, but then turned out that like the land that they were developing was part of it was occupied by indigenous people, which is some of the no-goes with, let's say, avoided deforestation projects, because you're not allowed to, let's say, interfere with the indigenous population in this area. So so basically they had what I think a very clever business model to do something which would help sustainability, but also like something for the young generation and not, let's say, too expensive to invest in setting some kind of footprint. But then they did, let's say, the ultimate sin of these projects, right? So to interfere with indigenous rights, and then of course the whole model was void, and the company, I mean, I think they're still running, but they don't have a lot of success anymore. But similar models done in a more prudent way, right? So could work also for young people. They could be linked up with fashion, both of big fashion companies, but also like small entrepreneurial startups who operate in the space. So yeah, but again, I mean, I was coming back to that. I think yes, it is a critical moment that we're living in, right? So that we have to act urgently, but I try to be optimistic or like progressive in that way. I mean, we need to deal with some kind of solutions, right? So even if solutions also always go along with their own problems, like let's say more digitalization, more energy consumption, also plastics was mentioned. So but I mean, we don't have a big choice, right? So we need to deal with these challenges and somehow go forward, or we just do everything as we did all the time. But that's also not the solution, right? So we need to find innovative ways to counter this.
I totally agree, Eric. The problem is we have now 5 more questions in the Q&A session, so probably we have to be very quick with our answers there. And actually, it starts with Claudia's question. So she's back. That's good to know. What are the main aspects what fashion institutions should integrate in curricula in order to foster sensibility? That's her question. Probably have a quick answer to that. One of you. What should fashion?
So I think Claudia, this has to be so sustainability should be, I would say, an crucial and an initial aspect of each curriculum, and the concrete aspects. I think this is a bit difficult to answer. I think first of all is the criteria what sustainability means, and this of course has to be linked to the topics of the institutions.
Okay, I think we have to be quicker with our answers. So I go on to another question.
The best thing always is to work with examples.
Right. Thanks, Theo. I carry on with a question by Ina. Question to Isabel and Eric. What would be the solution for more governmental support in investing in small or middle-sized startups? There's a huge misbalance between big companies and small startups. Sorry. So Isabel, perhaps you can say something to that.
I can give a very quick answer, right? So
that's good, Eric. Good to know.
More private funding and support, right? So don't trust or wait for the government to do something, right? So like try to make yourself attractive enough through creative ways that you find private investors fund, because there's enough private money, right? So like and governance also have money, but they're a lot more bureaucratic. So try to access private funding and do it in new ways, right? So which crowdfunding or Web 3.0, NFT minting, and link it somehow to what you want to do. And if it's convincing, then you will get the funds. I mean, there's enough money flowing around. So
okay, great. Do you want to add something, Isabel? No. Okay. So next question is by Charlie. A complete overhauling of the mindset is of paramount importance. Introducing the concept to students in an organic way ab initio is probably the most sustainable way of getting sustainability to stick on a psychological level for the long run. We all must come together to discuss possibilities to spearhead this goal. Thank you for putting it so aptly. Probably that's not so much a question, but it's
but something very interesting. Thanks, Shani, for that. And this could be actually what could be also applying to what Claudia was writing. You're absolutely right, and I think that it's very important that we have a common sense of sustainability. The biggest problem, because it's causing confusion, when you are at school or on universities in education, and you are confronted with the sustainability aspect. So academics use universities usually more from an academic side, and then you are getting into the business, and they have a completely different perception of sustainability. So we have to talk with one tongue, and this is I think very important. Because then we get the strength and the power if we bundle everything, and not if you go to a big company, go to Caring, they have a different. So for them, this is sustainability. Then you go to university, they are telling you something completely different what sustainability means. And I think as we have the SDGs or whatever with the goals, we should fix unique criteria about sustainability.
There's another comment by our colleague Ulrike Nägele, which I just read out after World War II. The influence of American lifestyle war was a major issue of the politics. They succeeded to implement all things in American style. This shows how much influence could have the politics on our lifestyle. Sustainability must be a lifestyle, must be sexy in a way. Okay, I think we can agree to the last sentence. I don't think that the influence of American lifestyle has the same power as in recent decades. That's my personal opinion. But there's probably another question we could answer by anonymous. To what extent do you think that the advantages promoted by the current regulatory framework for sustainability will be distributed along value chains, including suppliers based in less industrialized economies? Okay, that's a more tricky one. Theodor, something for you?
I'm happy to. Oh, sorry, didn't know which Theo. Sorry.
Theodor. It's you.
Theodor.
Oh, it's yours. Yeah. that's
sorry, I'm happy to come in just a bit on that, and I can give you a bit of a flavor on how the Commission thought of this question of value chains when it comes to carbon emissions, for example. The key question was when you look at any, so let's say we're looking at some sort of apparel manufacturing, right? You can look across the value chain and then you understand, where's my carbon footprint? Is it in the, cotton kind of part? Is it then in the pre-processing, the manufacturing? Is it the transport to the consumer? And then if you realize, as I think Eric was suggesting, that you actually have huge deforestation on your upstream, then, it could be that your policies are not about fashion, necessarily consumption, but are literally about regulating agriculture. And then it kind of takes you down the value chain. That is something that I think also just linking it a bit with that mindset and just changing people's perceptions. I very much agree that's important. But there's also a big but though. The question is, will just educating a lot of people make that, we have very short amount of time, and to say, yes, we started educating people in kindergarten, kids, yes, we should do that. Yes. But for action right now, I feel that there's a lot of action that needs to be done institutionally. We need to be smart to understand institutionally, because people have, they care about a lot of things, and our attention span is very short. Where is institutionally where we can get into the regulation and put the commas in the right place, that we actually change these value chains, we change the sourcing of the European Union, we change the regulation, and so on. That, to me, I think it's really important. And sometimes in industries that are mostly or focus a lot on B2C, sometimes the discussion goes into the people, pretty much like we do with having a car based on petrol, right? So they say, okay, is it really me, or is it the government's policy to give subsidies for electric cars? Like, and I feel like we should sometimes move the discussion in that area. So I'll stop now. Thank you.
No, thank you very much.
Maybe to add one critical point to this. Yeah. So EU regulation is by nature always very Eurocentric, right? So also when it comes to impacts on other countries. So like the example that Theodor was giving, right? So that now the EU wants to penalize or not let, let's say, products enter the union which come from deforested areas. I mean, that in some way it sounds like a good idea. Of course, we're also kind of patronizing the producers in these countries, right? So and this is not necessarily met, let's say, as a friendly act, right? So, or perceived as a friendly act. So in my opinion, it's better if we compensate them to do it in a different way, rather than to punish them if they don't do it according to our way. Because in the end, it's also their forest, right? So, and their land, and they have to decide what to do with it. So if we want them to act, let's say, more sustainable in what we believe sustainability is, then we need to pay for this, right? So like, we can't just punish them. But,
and can I say that I agree with it? I agree fully.
I wasn't against you, was more like a
I fully agree. And the issue with biodiversity, if I may, the key issue is that exactly what you're saying. We're talking about conservation where you have no capex. It's really not an investment. It's just the capex that goes in OPEX into preserving the Amazon, and you just leave it alone, for example. And we have this issue on a lot of market-based mechanisms, particularly for biodiversity and other environmental objectives, where you should just pay for conservation and do debt forgiving for Brazil so that they can pay for the Amazons and the rangers, right? So there's a lot, and I just want to say I fully agree with you. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot that we yet haven't understood is what is a global public good, because the finance and the finance agenda is also pushing this commodification and financialization of everything, and I feel like a lot of people don't understand what a public good is anymore.
No, exactly. It starts with the privatization of water and goes on. Whether that's the whole problem. Yeah, great. I think we've answered all questions from the Q&A session. So thanks for that. We were more quickly than I thought. So we have another 10 minutes to wrap it all up. I think, Theo, thanks again for your input. And I think we all agree that it's very important to start early with educating people what sustainability really is. And I think it's also a clever idea for investors to invest in early careers, in young entrepreneurs, because that's the only chance to change the whole industry. So probably that's my personal last words for this discussion, but you all have the chance to say something to wrap it all up now.
Yeah, so for me, it was really very, very interesting also to get the insights from Theodor and from Eric. And this is for me also the best case and an example what it means that we need a common mindset, and we have to bring all perspectives, all participants, all take the stakeholders, to use this typical word, into the same boat. And if we create an atmosphere like we had here, say, okay, we are all contributing to that, and because we are convinced that we have to stick on sustainability much more than ever before. And maybe it's something like going back to the roots. Sustainability is maybe nothing completely new. So when I grew up in the 60s, we lived completely sustainable. Because when clothing was damaged, it was repaired by my mother, and my little brother was wearing my clothing. Yeah, and this is we have to get back to a very intuitive perception of sustainability.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks to you, Isabel.
Well, I will just add that in terms of research that we are carrying between our Center of Research, which is Business and Engineering, and another center from psychology with young people, young students from secondary school. One of the results that we got is that students who are more involved, and I mean in terms of mindset, who have more information, are more involved with sustainability in both areas that people have some idea in terms of the environment and in terms of social rights, have more happiness, more well-being. And this is really interesting to get this information, for us as researchers. So I think this was to see with our own eyes that what we are doing, somehow each one of us in our field, is something that really brings health in mentally and physically and happiness to people.
Makes it all worthwhile then. Okay.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I have to say goodbye because I have to jump into my lecture. So it was a pleasure to all of you. So thank you so much, and keep the fire burning.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
So probably, Eric, Theodor, you can of course add something, but
yeah, let's just all be more sustainable. I think there are ways both on the individual level, but also at the entrepreneurial level, right? So we mentioned quite a lot, and I think we do agree on most of it. So what we need to do is prioritize and act on our own prioritizations and the consensus which is there, right? So that is not that we have.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's what I would do. Let's start being sustainable today, right? So not tomorrow. So.
Great. Theodor, you have the last words of this discussion.
I just wanted to thank you and thank you everyone for the great discussion. The key thing that I would maybe invite us to think about is what, as Eric said, what's the priority? What are we really trying to optimize? We have a lot of environmental and social objectives. I'm afraid that we won't be able to do them all as we're trying to optimize, although I would love to. I think when it comes to climate change, and we're talking about a 30-year time frame left for real disruptive action, I think we need deprioritization on decarbonizing the entire value chain.
Thank you so much to all of you. As I just wrote in the comments, it was great fun to talk to you. I've learned a lot, and let's stay in touch and stay sustainable.